Hey guys, Youngblood with you for the 70th episode of the Inbox. Starting off with a question from Dan McSharp saying, "Hello Youngblood, hello. Do you think there's any logical reason as to why the front turrets on a Retaliator cannot be slaved to the pilot when unoccupied?" Yeah, there is some logical reason behind it, and it's actually tied to the direction that CIG wants to take everything in the game. And recently they've talked about avionics blades that you can actually install into a turret that's going to then give you control to the pilot. Now, we don't know what restrictions that's going to end up putting into place as far as, like, you know, weapon sizes, or I'm guessing the only restriction is probably going to be it's going to be handled more like a gimbal, meaning you can probably only arc it a certain amount of direction. You know, you're not going to be able to aim it behind you when it's controlled to the pilot, for example. But that's something that's going to be coming. And I think when they say, all right, that's something that we want to do from a long-term gameplay perspective, they're not going to spend the time and effort to actually make those in work like that in today. The ball turret, for example, on the Super Hornet's a different example. That's not a manned turret. It's actually intended to be controlled by the pilot or co-pilot, so that works. What's happening, like, you know, other ships had this too, you know, so for example, like the Cutlass and the Vanguard, those turrets are not functional today without a person actually sitting in there. So this is intentional, and it's where they're going with it. And I think with the Retaliator, without those blades in it today, it's the main reason I don't have the ship. It's the main reason I don't fly the ship. I also don't care for the size 1 weapons, but I think the question then is going to be how many of those turrets are actually useful to be slaved to the, you know, the pilot, because if you start slaving the back turrets, you may end up shooting up your own ship or something like that. So I think it's going to be a balance of pilot-controlled weapons using those avionics blades and the, you know, where you want to put NPCs or players to help you out with the other turrets. MGC for Wilton says, question, why did you stop playing Planetside 2, and would you ever consider playing it again? They've had some really good updates like base building, and the game is very nice now. If you want to get back into it, NC can always use some help on Connery taking down FPS Korea. So the reason I stopped playing Planetside 2 is really two different reasons. And I guess I should say I haven't officially stopped playing Planetside 2, but I don't play it very often at all. The first reason is I don't have a ton of time to play and make my videos, so I really have to try and condense my efforts where I want it. So with that in mind, I saw Star Citizen being developed. I bit into the hype train. I knew I wanted to produce content on it. I knew I wanted to play it. So that's where my efforts ended up naturally shifting, especially since Planetside 2 had been out for so long that creating new content became very challenging when they weren't implementing that many new things. So from my channel perspective, it made a lot of sense to transition into something that was developing and something that's really going to be groundbreaking like Star Citizen. Now, the other side of that is I disagreed with the direction that the developers were taking Planetside 2. And primarily the thing that pushed me away the most was the introduction of the lattice system. Prior to the lattice system, you could go capture any base anywhere, regardless of the connections to other bases. And what that did was it allowed you to kind of cut off, well, not basically, you could go capture anything, and that started to break off the point. So, like, if you completely ate away the connections to the warp gate prior to the lattice system, you then stopped the push. And that was something that was very effective. Whether it was a smaller group, a bigger group, it didn't matter. It gave you a lot of strategic options for how you could play the game. When they introduced the lattice system, it focused all of the combat into like 3 or 4 areas on a continent. And while those fights are big and while those fights are fun, they can be incredibly frustrating. And you have limited ability to think outside the box to have an impact on the overall environment. That's what killed it for me. When it all of a sudden becomes spawn at the same location. There's no thought being put into it, and that's something that kind of really bothered me and turned me off from the game, because with nothing new really being added to the game, and a game I had been playing for a long time, then all of a sudden they took the thinking and the kind of the more cognitive side out of it. That became very frustrating for me. So yeah, there's new things in there like base building, there's ants, there's cool stuff like that, and yeah, they are fun and they are interesting, but it still doesn't take away the core gameplay that I used to have prior to Lattice being in place. Steve Noya says, STL, new to Star Citizen, wondering if there are any regular sales to wait for instead of going on the gray market. So with that in mind, there are a couple sales in a ship's life cycle. So when a ship goes on a concept sale, it's the, hey, this is going to be the cheapest you can buy it, this is where it's going to have LTI. You could end up buying it then. And after that, they used to have what was known as the hangar ready sale, and that was when the ship would be able to be seen in hangar, but it wasn't flyable yet. But we're past that point, so that sale doesn't exist anymore. Now it's when a ship goes flight ready, there's generally a sale. Now, past that, there are a couple other sales. Every year in November, there's an anniversary sale that lasts for about 10 days. Almost every ship goes up for sale. Not every ship. Some very limited ships don't end up seeing the light of day, although sometimes they do. Like, for example, this year, the Phoenix and the 890 Jump went up for sale. Those are very rare ships. And then, you know, things like the glaive and some of the other alien birds, you know, those don't always come up for sale again either. The other one is in December. There's generally a like a Christmas or a holiday sale that comes up for about 10 days. And then past that, they do some sorts of like theme sales throughout the year. So occasionally there'll be like a Drake sale or an Explorer sale or something like that. So there are other times you can buy. You know, you can absolutely go on the gray market. That's your prerogative. Do your research. I've got a video on it that you probably want to watch before actually going on the gray market. But there are other ways that you can get the ship. Norix says, hello Youngblood, thanks for your very informative channel. You are welcome. My question is, what do you think about the fight balance? Will all ships end up equal and strictly based on skill, or will the price and purpose of it still be taken into consideration? It kind of worries me a bit, and I don't think we'll ever see a Honda Civic beat an F1 with drivers of equivalent skill. Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on what you're talking about. You know, if you're talking about, you know, an F1 beating or a Civic beating an F1 in a drag race or a long distance race, yeah, I don't think that would ever happen. If you're talking about which one's going to carry groceries better to and from your house, that's a different story. So yeah, the role and purpose of a ship is absolutely going to need to be taken into consideration. You know, when you start talking about, you know, in-game today, price plays a factor too. You know, for example, generally speaking, a Hornet at $110 is going to generally lose to a Super Hornet at $165, or a Sabre at $170 or $80, whatever it ended up being. The price ends up playing a factor, but the price is also representative of what is going into the ship. Flight model, durability, weapon loadout, missile loadout, you know, the scanners, the suite, everything. So there's a lot of things that are really taken into consideration, and price is absolutely part of that. Now, the other part with price that is going to be coming is, and we will talk about this in, where we talked about this in the video of upcoming releases for the rest of the year. Item degradation, failure point, and luck is something that's coming, and then the price is important in that because the higher priced items are typically going to have higher ratings and are going to be less likely to fail on you. You know, so it just kind of depends. You know, getting back to the Civic versus F1, you know, we could look at it and say a Reliant is a cargo hauler at $60, and you know, an M50 is $100. You know, again, the Reliant's going to be better at hauling cargo. The M50 is going to be better at racing. So it kind of depends, you know, what you're talking about. So role is absolutely going to be what you really need to focus on there. Jimmy Todd says, I'm not very knowledgeable when it comes to hardpoint, so I was wondering if the size 1 gimbals that come on the Herald could be altered to fixed hardpoint so I could connect size 2 ballistics to the hull so I could provide decent suppressive fire while the sensors detract in preparations to jump or mate. Yeah, so hardpoints are essentially a math equation in a way. The Herald now has size 3 hardpoints, so you could technically put like 3 Panthers on there if you wanted to. But with that in mind, basically a gimbal is always going to subtract 1 size. So if you've got a size 3 spot, you can put a size 3 gimbal there, but you're only going to be able to equip a size 2 weapon to it. So, you know, in your situation, it kind of comes down to what you want to do. It sounds like you want to say, I want to put the biggest weapons on there possible. Then you want to go with fixed size 3s. That's kind of the overall way that works. You basically subtract 1 if you want a gimbal. You get the normal size of the hardpoint if you don't put a gimbal there. The Howitzer Priest Harris says, hey, Youngblood, love the content. Thank you. My question is, could a merchantman potentially be modified into something of a pseudo-carrier, something along the lines of being able to hold, say, 4 cutlasses in their full crews and 4 people, not all pirate reasons? Or do you think CIG doesn't want civilians to have such easy access to any form of carrier capabilities? No, I don't think the merchantman's going to carry 4 cutlasses, and I don't think it has anything to do with CIG not wanting, you know, civilians to have the capability of a carrier. I think it comes down purely to size. The merchantman, unless it grows significantly and gets some cargo hold that's capable of carrying 4 cutlasses, isn't going to be anywhere close to possible. And even on much bigger ships that we see, you don't get the option to carry other ships based on doors. You know, a good example would be like the Starfarer today. You can technically fit a Merlin on there, which works, and you can do that. You can fit a couple of them on there, but that's a snub nose. You know, the only ships really today that can carry a full other ship, and we're talking limited numbers here, would be the Endeavor with the hangar module, can carry 1 or 2 cutlasses. The Polaris can carry a fighter like Sabre size, Gladiator size, something like that. Or the Idris can carry a little bit. The Javelin can carry a little bit. There's nothing really today that's going to let you carry multiple cutlasses, at least on the civilian side of things, outside of maybe like the Endeavor. So the Merchantman is going to be a really cool ship for hauling cargo, but it's not going to be that for hauling ships. I think as far as the full crews, you know, three 3 people per crew for 4 ships, you're talking 12 people. Yeah, I think that would easily be accommodatable on a merchantman, but it's just not the purpose of the ship. So I don't think you're necessarily looking in the right place. Now, a civilian carrier is something that people keep asking for, and I don't think it's something that's going to be coming. I think the direction CIG is probably wanting us to take, at least until something like this gets developed, if it gets developed, is to have a starfarer in your fleet, make your jumps, refill your ships, and get going that way. So I think that's what you need to see. I don't necessarily think it's probably gameplay related. I don't really know what CIG's reason behind it is, because I haven't really heard them see anybody speak to it. But no, the merchantman is not going to fit that role. And our last 2 questions are patron questions, one from Clemerali. How will pirates and other orgs operating primarily in low-sec space obtain capital ships? Would obtaining UEE Navy capital ships and then selling them to players without sufficient reputation to purchase them be a viable income source? Will CIG even allow for pirates to have access to these ships? I don't think there's going to be any arbitrary restrictions from CIG saying that, you know, if you, because you're of this reputation, you can't have this ship. I think it's more of a, if you're capable of taking it, you can take it. So if we all of a sudden have a pirate organization that is massive and they're really well organized and they just ambush a Bengal carrier and everybody floods in, they disable the ship, they deal with the fighters, they get in, they kill all the people on board, they have the ship. I don't think there's anything that's going to stop that. Now, there could be some gameplay ramifications there. For example, I don't think you're going to see ships popping up out of nowhere, but I think it's probably going to say, okay, in the system next door, there is probably another Bengal or 2 that could come in and help out, or maybe a couple Polarises and an Idris or something like that. So they could have some things that make it more challenging, but I don't think it's going to be like you fight your way, you get all the way to the cockpit, you grab a hold of the steering wheel, and it's like, nope, you don't have access to this ship. I don't think it's going to work like that. So I think as far as obtaining capital ships, you're probably better off stealing them from other players because they don't necessarily have the same connections that a military ship would. I think selling them would absolutely be a viable income. The question, because people are going to pay exorbitant amounts to actually get something like that, but it's going to be more challenging to actually capture it in the first place, and then finding people that actually have the amount of credits that are going to be required to make that purchase. And then what happens as far as how does that person keep that ship without being hunted down constantly because they have that ship? So there's a lot of things that go into play there. Again, I don't think we're going to see arbitrary restrictions, but there may be gameplay aspects that are going to make it incredibly challenging. I think the most common reason people are going to have these capital ships are because they find derelicts, not because they're capturing them. And our last question is from Stairmaster. I had an idea about a question of letting friends steal your ships and how to police that. What do you think about an idea that when suspicious activity occurs to launch an insurance investigation, holding up the respawn return of your ship? This would give them time to investigate and perhaps deny the insurance claim altogether. I think that's an interesting idea. The question is, I don't know how that gets implemented and how that gets kind of policed. Is it some trigger in game that says this ship is tracked by serial number this, and now it's belongs to somebody that's on your friends list, so that all of a sudden launches an insurance investigation? I think that's probably the most likely way that would play out, but I don't know how they would end up making the overall determination. Is that actually somebody on CIG's QA team that has to go and investigate that? How do they do that? Is that some sort of advocacy team in the universe that goes back and replays footage? It's really, really complicated to do what you're suggesting there. I think it's interesting, but then there also runs into the situations of, I gave it to somebody who was on my friends list. My friend isn't actually a friend. He ran like hell, and now all of a sudden, he's not around. So I think ultimately at the end of the day, it really just comes down to how do they end up policing that, who's doing that, and I think that ends up being the case. So I don't know what they're going to do with this, because I think it's a really challenging thing regardless of what direction they take it, but we just have to wait and see. So that's it for this episode of the Inbox. If you guys have questions, please get them in. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys watching. Stay tuned for more, and have yourselves a wonderful day. Take care.